In this video, we'll learn how to recognize American foulbrood in a colony. It's actually much easier than you might think. And the reason it's easy is because the symptoms of American foulbrood are so different from the symptoms of any other disease that you can find in a colony. And also, we're going to talk about a matchstick test, which is a really easy way of making that confirmation of diagnosis. In this segment, we are going to deal with how to recognize American foulbrood in a honeybee colony. And to be able to do that, we have to do something called differential diagnosis. We have to be able to look at something and say whether or not there's American foulbrood. And the tricky thing is that there are a lot of other things in a honeybee colony that appear a little bit like the disease. And it's a matter of being familiar with all of those things first so that you can recognize American foulbrood when you see it. So for instance, you want to see what a normal brood might look like and be familiar with that. You want to know what larvae looks like and be familiar. What cells containing pollen look like, what cells containing honey look like. And after that, you then have to know about the other diseases that you can find in honeybee colonies. Okay, the first disease we'll deal with is sackbrood virus. It's a virus that attacks larvae, and the symptoms are you normally see a larvae lying along the floor of the cell with its head poking up, and the head will quite often be black. And because it's a virus, there's a lot of fluid in with the larvae. If you get a pair of tweezers and pull it out and hold the larvae up, what you can see is it'll hang there with this big fluid-filled sac. Or alternatively, if you put a matchstick in the cell and mush up the larvae, you'll see it's got a very watery appearance. So sackbrood is very easy to diagnose for those reasons. The next disease you have to know about is chalkbrood. And this one is produced by a fungus. And again, it attacks larvae and pupae. And the symptoms we normally see is a very white mummy that fills up the whole cell. And it may also have the head of the larvae still there, sticking up at the top of this and appearing yellow. But again, the symptom is very white and filling the whole cell. You also get black mummies as well. And the reason why is there's two mating strains. If you have both strains, they mate and produce black spores, and that's why you get white mummies and you get black mummies. The mummies can be removed by the cell. They're really quite hard, and you quite often find them sitting on the floorboard where the bees have removed them themselves. The next thing you have to be able to recognize is not a disease, but a disorder. And it's called parasitic mite syndrome. And we see it in colonies that have very high varroa levels. And what you see is the larvae spiraling up the cell and then eventually curling right around the opening of the cell in like a half moon. And we don't know exactly what causes it. We can't find any disease-causing organisms in there, but it's always associated with high varroa levels. We also have another disorder in New Zealand that's a queen-related disorder that has, again, very similar symptoms. It has an additional symptom, which is you see multiple eggs in cells, and that's called half-moon disorder. So it's PMS and half-moon. There's a third disease which we don't have in New Zealand at the moment, which is European foulbrood, which can have similar symptoms. But you won't necessarily see high varroa levels, and you won't necessarily see multiple eggs. If you still see these symptoms, because it might be European foulbrood, the best thing to do is to ring the MPI number, 0800 number, to report it as a suspect disease so that somebody can come and have a look at it. American foulbrood has some really typical symptoms that with a little bit of experience are very easy to recognize. The larvae are lying along the floor of the cell, just like they are with sackbrood, except they're a brown colour, the colour of coffee with milk in them. And sometimes, if the larvae lives a little bit longer before it's killed by the bacteria, it may be a pupae that's infected. And quite often you'll see a cell with a really brown pupae in, with its tongue sticking up, and that's very diagnostic of American foulbrood. But there's an easy test to be able to recognise whether it is or not. and we call it the matchstick test. What you do is you put a matchstick in the cell, mush up the larvae and pull it out. And what American foul brood does is that the bacterial or the bits of the larvae will rope out into a quite a long rope. And when you see that, you know that it's American foul brood. There is nothing else in a beehive that will rope like that. If it's been there a long time, the material will dry down and end up being black and being a small scale on the bottom of the cell. Much, much harder to diagnose. But what you would normally do is go and look elsewhere to try and find larvae with the more classical symptoms. The other thing you need to get used to seeing, and that's the cell cappings and what condition they're in. And in a normal situation, you'll quite often find a cell with a very even circular hole in the centre of it. And what's happening there is the cell's just being capped over, and when you look at it, they just haven't finished. And if you come back a little while later, they will have finished that completely. The other hole that you'll normally see in colonies is the one produced by a bee that's emerging from the cell. And that tends to be the outside ring of the cell, edge of the cell, where the larvae is pushing its way out. If you open it, you'll see a bee will come out of it. So they're easy to recognize. Now, when a colony's got a disease, it's different because the bees recognize there's something wrong with the larvae that's in there or the pupae that's in there, and they try to do something about it. And what they do is they chew at the cell, and what you see is an irregular hole in the cell. And it's very diagnostic, it's very easy to see, and you know that whenever you see a irregular cell, you've got to look to see what's underneath the cell. The other thing less diagnostic about American foul brood is the cell capping may be discoloured and it may be sunken as well. So any of those things point to there's a problem in the cell, you need to uncap it and look to see what disease it is. So in this video we learnt how to identify American foul brood. And the important things are to be able to recognise when a larvae is healthy, but also to be able to recognise, of course, from that, one that's different, one that's sick. And once you can recognise sick larvae, you can then look at them to see whether they have the symptoms of American foul brood. And the great thing that the management agency does, that even if you're still unsure whether it's American foul brood or not, you can get a sample tested and you'll get a definitive result from it.